The morning light always spilled into the Willow Creek General Store in a particular way, painting stripes across the worn wooden floorboards, illuminating dust motes dancing in the cool, crisp Vermont air. For Mara Carlyle, the proprietor of this small, bustling hub, it was a familiar comfort, a silent greeting to another day. At 32, she had inherited the store from her grandmother, along with a deep-seated respect for the quiet rhythms of this town, a respect that had been woven into the very fabric of her being since childhood. She knew every customer by name, knew their favorite coffee order, their latest triumphs, their quiet worries. Her life was simple, yet rich with connection, fueled by the hum of the old refrigeration unit and the constant, gentle chatter that filled the space. Most days, the biggest challenge Mara faced was ensuring Mrs. Henderson got her exact brand of imported tea or gently reminding young Timmy not to pocket the penny candy. She saw it all, the small acts of kindness and the equally small but persistent acts of disrespect that chipped away at the edges of communal life. From a customer leaving a half-eaten sandwich on a shelf to a group of teenagers loitering and leaving trash, these minor infractions, unaddressed, felt like tiny cracks in a dam. They were the everyday slights that solidified Mara's belief that unchecked entitlement, no matter how small, could slowly, insidiously erode the trust and mutual regard a community needed to thrive. She learned to handle them with a calm firmness, often a quiet word, a knowing glance, or a subtle rearrangement of products that sent a clear message without a single raised voice. That delicate balance, the unspoken agreement of respect and shared responsibility that held Willow Creek together, began to fray with the arrival of the Blackwood family. They weren't just new residents, they were an invasion. They arrived in a convoy of sleek, black SUVs, trailed by heavy construction equipment that seemed too large for the winding country roads. Their target, a sprawling tract of pristine land overlooking the Willow Creek River, purchased, they boasted, for a boutique luxury resort that would put Willow Creek on the map. Mara had heard the whispers, seen the eager faces of a few town council members blinded by the promise of prosperity, but her gut clenched with a familiar unease. She'd seen this kind of ambition before, always at the expense of what truly mattered. Arthur Blackwood, the patriarch, was a man whose expensive suits seemed perpetually rumpled, not from work, but from sheer disregard for their cost. His wife, Clarissa, was a walking advertisement for excessive plastic surgery and an even more excessive sense of entitlement. They were regulars at the store, not because they needed anything, but because it was the only place to grab a quick coffee, and they treated Mara and her establishment like a roadside diner they were forced to patronize. They spoke over her, never quite met her gaze, and left a trail of sticky fingerprints and crumpled receipts that she silently, methodically cleaned up. The way they spoke about the town, its quaint charm as if it were a costume show, the way they dismissed local concerns as small-minded or uninformed, it grated on Mara's nerves like fingernails on a chalkboard. It was the same disrespect she saw in the petty shoplifters, just magnified by 1,000. Their presence wasn't just an annoyance, it quickly became a threat. Their construction began with a ferocious speed that ignored local ordinances. They cleared swathes of ancient forest, ignoring the designated buffer zones along the river. The once clear waters of Willow Creek, renowned for its trout fishing, began to turn cloudy, a sickening gray-brown. Fishermen like old Silas Jenkins, whose family had fished these waters for generations, started reporting fewer catches, then no catches at all. Silas, a man of few words, came into the store one afternoon, his eyes hollowed out, showing Mara a photograph on his flip phone of dead fish floating belly up near the construction site. His voice, usually a low rumble, was barely a whisper. "They're poisoning it, Mara," he said, the words heavy with despair. "They're poisoning our river." Mara felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. This wasn't just about a few misplaced items or a discarded wrapper. This was an assault on the very lifeblood of Willow Creek, on its heritage, on the livelihoods of its people. She had always believed in speaking up, in following the rules, in the power of collective action, but the Blackwoods operated outside those norms. They had lawyers, deep pockets, and an air of invincibility that seemed to cow the local authorities into inaction. Complaints to the Town Planning Commission were met with shrugs and promises of investigation that never materialized. The Blackwoods simply paid the small fines, if any were even levied, and continued their destructive work, laughing all the way to their newly acquired, illegally constructed lakeside mansion. Mara watched, listened, and cleaned. She saw the despair in Silas's eyes, the quiet frustration of Martha Davies, whose well water, usually crystal clear, now tasted faintly of chemicals. She heard the forced cheerfulness of Councilman Miller, who suddenly seemed to be driving a much newer car. The disrespect wasn't just an erosion, it was a violent tearing. It was then, as she wiped down the counter one evening, listening to a true crime podcast someone had recommended, that a thought solidified in her mind. Some people, some situations, demanded a different kind of justice, a more strategic, more patient kind. It wasn't about vengeance for vengeance's sake. It was about restoring balance, reminding people that their actions had consequences, especially when those actions harmed the communal good. It was then she thought, and then she mentally repeated it, that for stories of true retribution, stories that truly mattered, one should probably remember to subscribe to Tales of Revenge channel for new revenge stories daily. The idea settled, deep and unwavering, a cold resolve taking root where frustration had once festered. Mara began her quiet work. Her general store was an unassuming intelligence hub. People talked there freely and openly about everything. They complained about the Blackwoods, their blatant disregard for the rules, the incessant noise from their construction site, the way their private security guards patrolled the public road leading to the river. Mara didn't just listen, she processed. She noticed patterns. Old Mr. Abernathy, a retired surveyor, grumbled about property lines being ignored. Sarah Jenkins, Silas's daughter, an amateur photographer, showed Mara blurred photos of strange pipes emptying into the river late at night. Young Billy, who delivered newspapers, mentioned seeing unusual trucks making deliveries at odd hours. Mara tucked each piece of information away, connecting the seemingly disparate threads like an intricate spider's web. She started subtly asking questions. Silas, did you notice what kind of pipe that was? Was it PVC or something else? Martha, did the water taste different after a heavy rain or all the time? She didn't press, didn't show her hand. She just collected. Her astuteness, honed by years of managing a small business and observing human nature, allowed her to discern truth from rumor, to spot the critical detail in a casual complaint. She spent her evenings after closing, not reading novels, but poring over old town plat maps, searching for zoning laws, reading up on environmental regulations. She cross-referenced anonymous tips with public records. She became a quiet, relentless archivist of the Blackwoods' transgressions. The Blackwoods, meanwhile, grew bolder, their sense of impunity hardening into outright arrogance. They put up massive private property signs on what everyone knew were historic public easements. They held loud, raucous parties that lasted until the early hours, their music echoing through the quiet valley. They even tried to pressure Mara to start stocking expensive, imported wines and cheeses, dismissing her local suppliers with a wave of Clarissa Blackwood's bejeweled hand. "Darling," Clarissa had purred, her voice dripping with condescension, "your little store just needs a bit of, shall we say, asterisk modernization. We can send you a list of distributors. Perhaps a new facade, something less rustic." Mara had simply smiled, a tight, polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Thank you for the suggestion, Mrs. Blackwood," she'd said, her voice even, "but Willow Creek residents tend to prefer local, and I'm quite partial to rustic charm. It keeps the flies out." The slight barb, delivered with such quiet confidence, had momentarily flustered Clarissa, but the encounter solidified Mara's personal stake in this unfolding drama. They weren't just harming the town, they were trying to change its very soul, to reshape it into something unrecognizable, something shallow and artificial. And Mara wouldn't stand for it. The despair in the town grew palpable. Silas stopped coming in, too despondent to even pick up his newspaper. Martha had to start buying bottled water, a significant expense for her on a fixed income. The summer fair, usually a joyous occasion for the community, felt subdued, shadowed by the looming construction and the pervasive sense of injustice. The local newspaper, usually a fierce advocate for the town, seemed to have gone quiet on the Blackwood issue, printing only sanitized updates about the resort's progress. Mara knew why. The Blackwoods had started placing large, full-page advertisements, subtly threatening to pull them if any negative press appeared. It was during one particularly bleak evening, the rain drumming against the store's windows, that Mara saw a small advertisement on her tablet. Tucked away at the bottom of a news article, she was reading about a large-scale environmental lawsuit. It read, "Subscribe to Tales of Revenge channel for new revenge stories daily." A small, almost imperceptible smile touched Mara's lips. Oh, she thought, if only they knew the story unfolding right here, in quiet Willow Creek. This wasn't a story for the history books, not yet, but it was being meticulously written, one small act of observation, one piece of collected data at a time. The frustration had sharpened into a focused, almost clinical determination. The whispers had become a symphony of data points in Mara's mind, waiting to be orchestrated into a crescendo. She began compiling her evidence into a secure, encrypted folder on her old laptop, naming it simply, The Weeds. She organized it by type: environmental violations, permit discrepancies, harassment claims, suspicious financial transactions, even photos of the Blackwoods' luxury vehicles parked illegally in handicapped spots outside her store. She created a timeline, meticulously detailing each incident, each complaint, each ignored plea from the town. She knew that a single accusation could be dismissed, but a mountain of irrefutable, cross-referenced evidence would be impossible to ignore. Mara's strategy was patience, her weapon was information, and her battlefield was the complex web of relationships and regulations that governed Willow Creek. She started discreetly sharing insights, not directly accusing, but guiding. She mentioned to Silas that she'd heard about a new state-level environmental protection hotline, or she'd suggest to Mr. Abernathy that he look up the original land deeds for the easements she knew the Blackwoods were violating. She didn't tell them what to do, she just provided the missing piece of the puzzle, the crucial detail that would empower them to act. She was the informal networker for communal justice, a silent conductor guiding her orchestra. The Blackwoods were busy. They had begun installing a massive, garish sign at the entrance to their property, proclaiming it Blackwood Haven. They started diverting even more of the river, disrupting the natural flow for their planned private lake. The local wildlife, once abundant, began to vanish. Ducks no longer congregated near the old bridge, deer were rarely seen in the meadows, and the familiar chatter of songbirds was replaced by the incessant drone of heavy machinery. The beauty of Willow Creek was being systematically dismantled, piece by precious piece. Mara also heard rumors. Whispers passed over the counter with bags of flour and loaves of bread. The Blackwoods were supposedly having financial troubles, despite their outward show of wealth. Suppliers hadn't been paid on time, and there were whispers of bounced checks. Mara didn't dismiss these as mere gossip. She added them to her growing mental file, cross-referencing them with the public permits and property records she'd been diligently studying. Discrepancies began to emerge. The cost of construction materials seemed inflated on their public filings, and the number of employees listed on their permits didn't match the actual number of workers observed on site. These were small discrepancies, easily missed, but to Mara, they were threads, each one waiting to be pulled. One rainy afternoon, a young, nervous man came into the store. He was one of the construction workers, new to town, clearly uncomfortable. He bought a coffee and some snacks, his eyes darting around the store. As Mara rang him up, he mumbled, almost too low to hear, "They're telling us to dump the fill in the old quarry. Says it's empty, but it's not right." He didn't elaborate, just paid and hurried out, leaving Mara with a new, chilling piece of information. The old quarry was a known watershed area, vital for replenishing the town's underground springs. Dumping construction waste there would contaminate the town's primary water source for generations. This wasn't just disrespect, it was pure malice. The stakes had escalated beyond simple property disputes or environmental negligence. This was a direct threat to the health and future of Willow Creek. Mara felt a surge of cold fury, sharper and more potent than anything she had felt before. This was her line in the sand. Her patience, her strategic planning, everything she had been building, was now absolutely critical. She knew that any direct action by her would be dismissed as petty vendetta. She had to empower the community to reclaim what was theirs, to use their own voices, fortified by her silent evidence. This was the moment. She would not simply watch her community wither. Mara's fingers flew across her keyboard late that night, fueled by strong black coffee. She began drafting meticulously detailed, anonymous letters. One went to the State Environmental Protection Agency, outlining the specific times and locations of the river pollution and quarry dumping, citing regulatory codes, and attaching Sarah Jenkins's photos. Another went to the State Board of Contractors, detailing the permit violations and the discrepancies in material costs and labor, complete with dates and public record numbers. A third, perhaps the most damning, went to the state attorney general's office, outlining a pattern of harassment, intimidation, and potential financial fraud, linking the Blackwoods' legal threats to their apparent cash flow problems, a suspicion deepened by the worker's nervous confession. She knew she couldn't send them all from her own computer or her own post office. That would be too traceable. Mara had a few trusted allies, people who believed in the quiet power of justice, people who owed her small favors, or simply understood the gravity of the situation. There was Brenda from the neighboring town, a retired postal worker who frequented Mara's store for her specialty teas, and who Mara knew had a knack for discretion. There was also Tom, a trucker who delivered Mara's bulk supplies, and who often had routes that took him through different states. These were her silent partners, unwitting perhaps, but reliable. She packaged each letter with care, ensuring no fingerprints, no stray hairs, nothing that could link them back to her. The photographs were duplicated, printed on different printers, subtly altered in metadata to obscure their origin. Each package was then given to her trusted couriers with vague instructions. Just mail this from a different county, would you, Brenda? Or Tom, if you're ever in New Hampshire, drop this in a mailbox there. She watched them leave, these seemingly innocuous packages, knowing they carried the weight of Willow Creek's future. The waiting began, a taut, anxious silence that stretched over days, then weeks. The first ripple came from the State Environmental Protection Agency. Their initial visit to Blackwood Haven was a surprise, unannounced. Mara saw their official vehicles, unmistakable with their state seals, driving slowly past her store towards the Blackwood property. She heard the faint sounds of shouting, saw Arthur Blackwood's furious gesticulations from a distance. The work at the site visibly slowed, then stopped. A few days later, a cease and desist order was posted on the Blackwoods' front gate, citing multiple environmental violations. The local newspaper, after much public outcry and now feeling pressure from the state, finally published a front-page story, complete with Sarah Jenkins's clearer, officially verified photos. The community breathed a collective sigh of relief, but Mara knew this was just the beginning. The Blackwoods, however, were not ones to go down quietly. Their lawyers descended, threatening countersuits, filing appeals. They blamed malicious individuals and misinformed busybodies for their woes. Arthur Blackwood even stormed into Mara's store one morning, his face contorted in a mask of rage, demanding to know who was behind this. "You hear everything, don't you, Mara?" he sneered, leaning over the counter, his breath hot with stale coffee. "Who is stirring up this hornet's nest? Who is feeding these lies to the state?" Mara met his gaze, her own eyes calm and unwavering. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, her voice even, "people in Willow Creek talk. They see things, they hear things, and when their homes, their livelihoods, and their beautiful river are threatened, they tend to speak up. It's called community, something you might not be familiar with." Her quiet defiance only seemed to infuriate him further, but he had no proof, only suspicion. He stormed out, slamming the door, leaving a visible tremor in the floorboards. Mara simply picked up the small, expensive pen he'd dropped in his fury and placed it neatly in the lost and found box. The second wave hit them a week later. The State Board of Contractors launched a full-scale investigation. Mara heard from Billy, the paperboy, that auditors and investigators were swarming the Blackwood property, poring over blueprints, questioning workers, comparing invoices. The discrepancies Mara had painstakingly cataloged became undeniable. The Blackwoods had been using cheaper, substandard materials, lying about the number of skilled laborers, and diverting funds. The construction permits, obtained through questionable means, were revoked. The Blackwood Haven Resort was declared an illegal structure. The third, and most devastating, blow came from the State Attorney General's office. Their investigation, initially slow, had gained momentum after the environmental and contractor findings. The anonymous tips Mara had provided, detailing the Blackwoods' intimidation tactics, their attempts to buy out neighbors below market value, and their suspicious financial activities, suddenly made sense in the context of their other illegalities. Local authorities, previously hesitant, were now eager to cooperate, seeing the writing on the wall. Allegations of racketeering, financial fraud, and even reckless endangerment due to the quarry dumping began to surface. The Blackwoods were cornered. Their legal team, once so formidable, was now overwhelmed. Lawsuits piled up from Silas Jenkins and the local fishing association, from Martha Davies and her neighbors whose water was contaminated, from former employees who claimed they were underpaid or not paid at all. The community, once feeling powerless, now surged with a renewed sense of strength and unity. Protests erupted outside the Blackwood property, peaceful but firm, demanding justice. Signs appeared everywhere, not just angry slogans but witty, defiant messages. Willow Creek isn't for sale, our river, our life, Blackwood gone bad. The local media, no longer intimidated, feasted on the story, detailing every twist and turn. Blackwood's carefully constructed facade crumbled. Their finances were frozen, their assets seized. Arthur Blackwood, once so imperious, was seen arguing with his lawyers on the courthouse steps, his face pale and drawn. Clarissa, her designer clothes now looking ridiculous and out of place, avoided all public appearances. The Blackwood Haven became a symbol of their hubris, an abandoned monument to their downfall, its half-finished structures exposed to the elements, a testament to their unchecked greed. Mara would often observe it from a distance, a faint smile playing on her lips. Justice, like a quiet current, had finally swept through Willow Creek. The ultimate satisfaction for Mara wasn't in seeing the Blackwoods ruined, though she admitted a quiet sense of vindication, but in witnessing the healing of Willow Creek. The river, though it would take years to fully recover, slowly began to clear. Silas Jenkins, his eyes bright again, started fishing, reporting small, hopeful catches. Martha Davies' well water, after extensive and costly state-funded remediation, began to taste clean once more. The community, having faced down a powerful threat and emerged victorious, was stronger, more resilient, and more united than ever. They had learned the value of their collective voice, of standing up for what was right, and of trusting the quiet, observant types like Mara, who saw more than met the eye. Mara's general store hummed with a different energy now. The conversations were lighter, filled with a renewed sense of pride and possibility. Customers still brought her their worries, but now they also brought her their triumphs, their plans for the future. She still listened, still observed, but now there was a distinct hum of satisfaction in the air, a quiet understanding that vigilance was key, and that the fabric of their community, once frayed, had been mended, strengthened by collective action and discreet, strategic planning. Mara would often sit on her porch after the store closed, watching the sunset paint the sky over Willow Creek, the sound of the gently flowing river a soothing lullaby. She thought about the small acts of disrespect she had endured over the years, the way they had foreshadowed the larger, more destructive entitlement of the Blackwoods. She realized that every unaddressed slight, every ignored rule, contributed to a world where such blatant disregard for others could thrive. Her revenge wasn't loud or violent. It was quiet, strategic, and deeply satisfying, a testament to the power of community and the unwavering belief that justice, even if it took its time, would always find its way. And as the stars began to pepper the darkening sky, she thought about the power of stories, of how they could inspire, educate, and remind people that even in the face of overwhelming odds, a quiet, persistent pursuit of justice could prevail. For truly inspiring tales, she knew, one only needed to subscribe to Tales of Revenge channel for new revenge stories daily.